morning, everyone. My name is Orna Naftali, and I'm the chair of the Asian Studies Department. And before we begin, I would like to note that this lecture constitutes part of a recruitment process for a China Studies position in the Asian Studies Department. And we will have the 30-minute lecture followed by 30 minutes of discussion. So please save any questions or comments you may have until the end. And members of the audience are also welcome to send feedback regarding the lecture no later than December 30th. And you can do this by emailing me or the representatives of the Faculty of Humanities Development Committee who are sitting here today. If you please raise your hands. Okay, yes. So if you want to approach them after the lecture and get your email. And we also have the Dean of Humanities here with us today, Professor Siegel. So thank you, Dean Siegel, for coming. And now allow me to introduce our speaker this morning, Professor Bo Zhiyue. Professor Bo is Deputy Dean of Xipu New Era Development Research Institute and Director and Professor of Xipu Institution at Xi'an Jiaotong Liverpool University in Suzhou, China. Professor Bo earned his Bachelor of Law and Master of Law in International Politics from Peking University and a PhD in Political Science from the University of Chicago. He's the author of 10 books and more than 200 articles and book chapters on the topics of China's elite politics, Chinese provincial leaders, Central-local relations, cross-strait relations, Sino-US relations, international relation theories, and global governance. The title of his lecture today is Selection of Local Leaders in China, Meritocracy or Personal Connections. Thank you so much for coming, and the floor is yours, Professor Bo.
My time. Thank you so much. It's really my pleasure to be here. I'd like to locate my topic in terms of my academic career. Number one, this topic has nothing to do with Chinese foreign policy, in particular US-China relations, because you probably know I've done some work in that regard as well. Number two, has not much to do with elite politics, probably a topic I'm going to cover this afternoon. It is about local leadership selection in China. Let me just go. Because of time constraints, I will be very simple in terms of my topic. I would like to make a few points. Number one, there are different categories of leaders in China. There are basically three categories of leaders in China: national leaders, local leaders, and grassroots leaders. So local leader, this is actually a fact, is a large group of politicians. I'll show you. Basically, local leaders are composed of leaders from three different layers: provincial level, prefectural level, and county level. Each level has many, many units. Provincial leaders, are coming from 31 provincial units, including 22 provinces without Taiwan, 5 centrally administered cities, 4, and 5 autonomous regions. And I'll just give you a list of, kind of a picture of who's who. Basically, it's hard to cover everybody at the provincial level. Basically, I cover 4 types of leaders: party leaders, government leaders, provincial Congress standing committee members, and Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. For each category, if you just count top number one leader, you'll find, for instance, in terms of party leaders, basically we're talking about standing members of the provincial party committee, ranging between 12 to 15. Then you have government leaders, basically governors, vice governors, and sometimes Secretary General of the government. Then Congress, basically chairman and vice chairman. And political consultative conference is also chairman by chairman. But there are some overlaps. For instance, governor usually is deputy secretary of the party committee. And in many cases, party secretary, or in past time, it's called first party secretary, is concurrent chairman of the Provincial People's Congress Standing Committee. This is in most cases, but with some exceptions, some major exceptions, in these 4 centrally administered cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Tianjin, Chongqing. Because these party secretaries are concurrently Politburo members. Actually, they are national leaders. So they are not concurrent chairman of their local provincial party Congress standing committees. And Xinjiang is also exception, and Guangdong are, because these 2 places also produce Politburo members as party secretaries. So there's some overlap. So basically, if you count the number of posts, and then you try to identify how many individuals are there, basically altogether 1,273 posts, and held by 1,175 individuals. All right, so these are provincial leaders. Prefectural leaders. Actually, prefecture, in terms of Chinese constitution, is not a legally level. There's no such level in Chinese constitution. They are the kind of representatives of the provincial leaders in different places. But in Chinese political structure, this is very, very important, because Chinese provinces are very large. So it's very hard for any provincial leaders to manage all these counties. So what they did was, in the 1980s, they decided to convert all these prefectures into cities. So actually in China it's very confusing. If you talk about cities, there are 4 different levels, or even 5 different levels. They all called cities, but actually they have different rank in Chinese system. See, prefectures, there are 334 prefectures, including 294 cities in China. If you put them into different categories, it's also fascinating. Actually, you probably find 1,356 posts for top #1 leaders in all these different categories. And one interesting thing is that I think people don't recognize that actually in all 4 centrally administered cities, there are no prefecture level. Actually, this is very confusing. You've talked to people working in Chinese system, they don't really know. Because they thought somehow, for instance, Beijing enjoyed the status of a provincial level, but one level below it is not prefecture. Of course, leaders can actually have a much easier access to move forward from almost like county level to higher level. In order to prove, I just wanted to indicate, because if you wanted to calculate the number of top leaders in China, it takes a long time. So I want to give you an example, in terms of Zhejiang province. Zhejiang province, if you just count top 1, is 44 positions. But if you count because each party committee has a number of, more than 10 people, and government has, around 10 people, so on and so forth. So altogether is 10 times as large as the top 1 leadership. So actual number of the prefectural leaders are much, much bigger than top #1 positions in this level. In order to prove somehow I was right in terms of saying, because people are actually, if you go to different counties, different places, even some government officials would argue with you because they don't really know I know the stuff I'm doing. So sometimes I show them, this is actually from Chinese yearbook. And you can see these are all zeros at the prefectural level. You know, Beijing, Tianjin, Shanghai, and Chongqing, they are all zero. Why? Because they don't have that status. County is much, much larger. And in terms of counties, there are 2,851 counties. Actually, one county in China is quite big, very, very big. You know, sometimes it's over 1 million population. So, you know, for instance, you know, Suzhou is a prefectural level city. It has 11 million. 11 million in terms of population is much larger than Israel as a country. So it's very, very important for anybody who is looking at China, trying to understand China, to know the difference between different levels, because when you are dealing with Chinese officials, you have to know exactly what their status in this hierarchy. For instance, you know, people in Singapore even get confused when they were first have interactions with Chinese leaders. When party secretary came in first, they said, "Oh, this is personal secretary of the mayor." We thought, you know, that the mayor was more important than the secretary, because secretary somehow sounds like a personal secretary of the mayor. So, they have to learn through the process. Basically, so this is the group of people we're talking about in terms of local leadership. It's a really large group. Think about it. Let me try to simplify the whole number game. For provincial leaders, about 1,200. For prefectural leaders, about 12,000. For county level, it's about 120,000. Let's put it that way. It's not really accurate, but it's roughly in the right ballpark. Okay, but how do we make sure we are selecting the right people for right positions? Basically, the question is, how are they selected for positions, or how are they selected for promotions? In theory, you know, actually in practice, different eras have different rules. Probably Mao, starting from Mao Zedong, you know, this is actually a long story. In Mao Zedong era, political loyalty became very, very important because it's a long story. And so, but people have lifelong tenure until they have political problems. They will be purged altogether, and sometimes physically removed, assassinated in some way.
Or die.
Or die.
Life must not be very long.
Yeah, the life has to be short to make sure it's lifelong. Anyway, Deng Xiaoping decided to have different rules. He decided to end this lifelong tenure. He introduced this institutionalization to the system. So he decided to have, start have some limits in terms of terms or age. Then Deng Xiaoping's idea has been gradually implemented by his successors, like Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao. However, when you come to the new era of Xi Jinping, we are facing different rules. Again, it's kind of like a reminder of the Mao's era. Somehow, political criteria has become top priority. If you read reports about how this new leadership has been selected, they keeps emphasizing a few things. Actually, it's more about politics. Then, basically, they're talking about performance as a kind of merits, the kind of an indicator of merits, and they wanted to make sure some people can be promoted, some people are being demoted for some reason. Education, because starting from Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leadership decided that we need to realize these so-called formalizations. We need people who have knowledge, who have expertise, who are professional, and so on and so forth. So they decided to have this hard criteria for people to get promoted or selected. So they decided to require people at the different levels to have at least 3-year college, in Chinese called 大专, and at least, or for department level or prefecture level has to be 4-year college education. So probably you know, in 1977, Deng Xiaoping decided to reopen college to everybody, because before that, only workers, peasants, soldiers were allowed to be recruited into universities by selection. So now this is time, open, fair exam. Everybody should participate. So this is my account from 1982. So the first graduates is February 1982, because the first class, 1977 class, took exam in December. They entered university in April or June or May something. So they graduated in February of 1982. The second class is 1978 class. They entered university in September 1978, and they graduated in July 1982. So basically, you can see altogether from 1982 all the way to 2019, we have graduated more than 100 million graduates, from all these universities. So that means we have produced a large pool of social talents for political recruitments. But if you look at the educational backgrounds of the top leaders, provincial leaders, basically I have data set of 2 leaders. One is party secretary and the governor, altogether 62 people. You can see, if you put them all together, less than 62% have this 4-year college education. But party secretaries are much, much less educated. Even now, this is actually the data from December 2019. You can see only about 39% of the people who have received regular 4-year college education. And more than 48% have no higher education at all. So there's a huge mismatch between social elites and the political elites, even today, after more than 40 years, 40 years of reform. This is very fascinating. Anyway, they also have other criteria like a transfer, avoidance, and retirements. For this retirement, there are 2 different ages. For vice ministers, you have to retire at age of 60, and full ministers 65. But this might change because of new leadership. My one argument for the selection of the leadership at local level is performance. Merit-based. What is merit? Merit basically is about performance. If you are doing well in terms, my dissertation is about correlation, statistical model, correlation between Chinese economic performance of Chinese provinces and the political mobility of their provincial leaders. So my conclusions are, number 1, if one province is doing well, there's more likelihood that this provincial leader will stay on, not necessarily get promoted. If this province is making larger contributions to the central coffer, the provincial leaders are more likely to be promoted. So the revenue contributions are much more important for national leadership than so-called economic growth. But later on, since 1990s, start to have the tax reform. They decide, so basically, GDP growth became very important indicator for economic growth. So my argument is that China's national economic growth, or economic miracle, has been a result of local competition among provincial leaders. However, people also go to extreme. in order to, because they saw the connection, you know, so-called correlation, they decided to fabricate economic growth on paper so that it would get promoted in reality. So I can show you my data. Starting from 2003, you can see a major gap between local, the total of provincial GDP and national GDP. In theory, they should be the same, or more or less the same. But in reality, local leadership, local provincial totals are always larger than national total because you have different sources of report. So this is kind of a, kind of distorted this kind of performance model. In some cases, it's even reflects the so-called political cycles, because every 5 years you have the National Party Congress. So that before National Party Congress, the provincial leaders, in order to compete for a spot in the Politburo or in the next Central Committee, they would compete for higher numbers in terms of economic growth. So you can see the 2011, that is 1 year before 2012, 18th Party Congress. The exaggeration is far, far off the chart. Okay. Then, once they are in, nobody cares. I'm 2012, nobody cares. So actually, it's kind of close to the national total. And next year, because they are going to compete for national leadership in the state, they also have to somehow demonstrate they are capable leaders. So you got this distortion. Actually, starting from a few years ago, because you cannot keep inflating your numbers forever. So what happened in past few years, since 2014, 15, they decided to reflect their past performance. They started to confess their sins in the past by their predecessors, not themselves. So they start to deflate their numbers. Say, oh, this number, actually, in some cases, 1/3. Even in revenue as well. In both GDP numbers and like Tianjin, Tianjin, Liaoning, in the Mongolia. They, in Liaoning, in the case of Liaoning, because Wang Ming, former party secretary, was in jail. So they said, okay, we had problems since Wang Ming's time. And I think they are going a little too far. Why? Because they need to have a lower ground to have a higher growth later on. So this kind of political game, there's a political logic behind Chinese economic miracle, but there's also a political game to be played by all these provincial leaders at the local level. So it's really fascinating. All right, connections and mobility. Here, there are different theories. Domes is saying, in Chinese called Tongxiang, people from same origins. Tongxue, classmates. Tonghang, very generic categories. But Cheng Li wanted to put it in the factual terms. He's saying, oh, Shanghai clique, there are different cliques, different factions. Your Shanghai clique and Tsinghua clique and usually clique and princelings, so on and so forth. But I'm a little more cautious. I said, well, wait a minute, let's see who they are, how they are interacting with each other. So basically what I use is much more cautionary note. I use factional groups, I use corporate groups, I use categoric groups. For instance, princelings. Princelings are not factions. Princelings are a category of people. Children of, senior revolutionaries. But how could they be, one faction? I don't really know. Actually, I have written some articles criticizing these, when people say there is rise of Xi Jinping, therefore is a rise of princelings. I use concrete cases to defer. I said, actually, you look at the case of Liu Yuan, Bo Xilai, for instance, so, they are also princelings, but why they are going down instead of going up? So my prediction was actually, as a result of rise of Xi Jinping, princelings in general are in decline. Not only in the government, in the party system, but also in the military as well. A friend of mine is from here, Yufi, Alice Yufi, was a good friend. He's doing national, military politics. I'm doing local level. So we had a good chat. Anyway, all right, my concluding, I cannot say I have a conclusions, but I have concluding remarks. Okay. Basically, they are a large political group, and local leaders are key players for Chinese economic development. Actually, this is the case even today. So if we are missing local leaders, I don't think Chinese economy can get off the ground again. So basically, the political logic in terms of economic success is competition among local leaders, especially among provincial leaders, has led to national development. But the GDP-oriented growth, also distorted of the GDP as a whole. So basically, I also say, personal, I have a lot of examples in terms of personal connections also play a very important role. Local leader selections. In times of Hu Jintao, Hu Jintao was elected as the General Secretary in 2002, and I stayed on for 10 years. Usually, the second term is called second term effect, because the first term, all these leaders were put in place by his predecessors. And the second term is term when he can actually do something himself. So you need to look at the second term, who's who. Then, for instance, in the 17th Central Committee, there were 82 people who were affiliated with Youth League, because Hu Jintao used to be top leadership in the Youth League committee. So 82 people were affiliated with this Youth League in 2007. But now you see a different people, starting from 19th Party Congress. This kind of topic, big topic we're going to talk about this afternoon, and we'll see different faces. So the personal connections also play a very, very important role. However, the problem is because sometimes you emphasize too much on personal connections, performance could be compromised. So actually, this is a chapter for a handbook on Chinese public administration. So basically, I provide a little advice for future scholars. You wanted to study local leaders in China, they need to do A, B, C, D. Basically, A is we have a lot of data. Data is fully available, but you have to put them together. Then you have to understand the difference among different levels of the leadership. Then probably in some cases you really have to do one case studies or comparative case studies in order to have a more understanding of the deeper structure of the Chinese system. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being on with me. And now we have half an hour for discussions, questions, and comments, preferably short questions and not monologues would be appreciated.
Okay, I have plenty of questions, but I don't want to monopolize the discussion. Just one very brief question. What about the military leadership? Because you talked about the government, hierarchy, the party hierarchy. What about the military? What are the relationship between military and civilian leaders? Then I have some more, but later.
Okay, we'll go around the room and maybe take 3 questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, going around the room. Just like,
I was just wondering if there's so much cooking of the books in terms of the economy, Why are they not cooking the books in terms of education? Why aren't we seeing phantom four-year college degrees appearing? Considering also that a real four-year college degree is not that hard to get without actually going to college. Anyway.
Good. Yeah.
Okay, two questions. One, why the secretary's level of education is so lower than of the governors? It's something a little bit for me counterintuitive that the secretaries are lower. And second, more important question, I think. You speak about personal connection and personal connections, and I'm sure that they are very important. But how we, without real access to the internal information, can evaluate the impact of personal connections on the selection of officials? How will you teach the students here to do this job?
We'll take 3 questions. How about you answer the
All
first
right,
3 and
four.
then
Now we have 4 questions. Okay, the military. It's very
3
interesting.
people ask
Yeah,
the
yeah.
question.
Military. It's a big topic. You know, I because you want to include the military. I have a separate chapter on local military leadership in terms of the provincial leadership, because at each level you have one standing member. For instance, at the provincial level, you should have one standing member who is from the military, local military leadership. Then this person could be either political commissar or commander, depending on the situation of that provincial military district. However, I think this is a long story, because if you look the whole history since 1949, there's a lot of variations. For instance, under Mao, there was sorry. Let me just dismiss the whole thing. Under Mao, basically, there's a combination. You know, the military became provincial leaders themselves. They became first party secretary as well as governor. You know, chairman of the Revolution Committee. But later on in 1970s, after the downfall of Lin Biao, Mao decided it was not a good idea to have a military controlling the different localities. So he decided to transfer all these military leaders from different region from one region to another, 8 of them, but out of civilian system. But I think what is happening now is Xi Jinping is doing more or less the same, because he doesn't want to have a military to intervene in local politics too much. So I think military at the local level is at low key, and they are trying to disengage the military leaders from local politics. The cooking of the book in terms of education. If you talk about, this is actually if you read the official resume of these people, many of them have master's degree and doctoral degree, right? So this is my effort to demystify their so-called education background. So what I did was, I don't care you claim you have a master's degree. Usually they have so-called a master degree equivalent from Central Party School.
Okay.
Okay? And in many cases, they also have a doctoral degrees. I don't really care. I want to actually go back and after your high school, have you got higher education? Is 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years? If it's less than 3 years, it's not really college education. So many of these people did not go through regular formal education. So this is my account. If you look at the official resume, no, they are all fully qualified, because according to the regulation, you have to have at least 4-year college to be promoted at the provincial, a prefectural level. How could you get to the provincial level, being still, you're party secretary, but you have no higher education? That's no way. So each of the steps, they are able to find a way to boost their education background. So, but that's not what my account is. Their account. Anyway, provincial party secretaries. This is actually very fascinating. So this is also a result of my research on provincial leaders in general. Basically, there are 2 types of leaders. One is kind of so-called generalists. One is specialists. So-called specialists tend to have higher education, but these people tend to be at a lower rank. If you have master's degree or even doctoral degree, you don't have a chance to go too far because you spend too much time working on your academic career. You what I think is opportunity cost. You miss the opportunity to get connected with very important people. So you cannot go too far. So, but these people who are generous, they know how to get around in this system. If you need a doctoral degree, I get a doctoral degree tomorrow, maybe in 2 years. So they know how to meet the demands of their superiors. And these, kind of intellectuals, they are too honest. They say, oh, you need a doctoral degree. They probably spend 8 years trying to get that one. But lose chance because they have to be at a certain age to get promoted. They spend too much time doing wrong things in terms of politics. How do we evaluate the personal connections? It's very, very hard. Because that's why I don't think it's really credible to say, oh, since these two people are coming from the same province, therefore they are supposed to be, belonging to the same faction. Not necessarily. Think about Mao Zedong and Lin Biao. They are from same province, Hunan province, right? And Liu Shaoqi is the same, also from Hunan province. But they became political enemies later on. And Deng Xiaoping, Yang Shangkun, they've been friends for decades, 4 decades. But after 1992, they became enemies. So in many cases, it has to be situational. So that's why it's not good to do Chinese politics in static way. So I like to encourage everybody to look at Chinese politics in terms of dynamics. You cannot just follow one particular rule and say, okay, I know the truth of all, and I'll read my little red book, I'll be able to make all the predictions about Chinese politics. That's impossible.
Do another round?
Yeah.
I'm going to take a chair for this. So my question actually has to do with recent dynamics. So under Xi Jinping, some scholars or commentators have looked at centralization of power or decentralization of power. So I wonder, what's your thoughts? I mean, the era is still going on, but in this balance of power, so to speak, between the provinces, local government, and central government, do you see a real change until now? And you can also maybe mention the effects of the anti-corruption campaign. Has it actually meant that there's less autonomy at the local level and the officials are really scared now to do anything? What are your thoughts about that? What are we seeing the dynamic between the power balance between the center and localities? And I will go around the room. Yes.
Your talk was mainly about promotion. I would like to ask about emotion. Because maybe it's more complicated, and how much it is connected to performance and how much to politics and those kind of things.
Emphasize the Boshi line.
So, for me, the most interesting part of your talk is when you spoke about inflated GDP numbers before the party congress. And my question is specifically about real estate, because one of the easiest ways to inflate the GDP is to build a lot. So do you think that the competition in building in real estate between provincial leaders may cause a real estate bubble in the future?
Yeah, actually, we had a talk when we showed the presenter showed the different graphs of starting building, starting the new tenure. So it goes something like this. So each new government actually start to build, right? So it's actually going there like this. But actually, my question is less about real estate, but more about ideology. Actually,
ideology.
And I talked about actually incorporating, I would say, pragmatism in appointments, in promotions, and so on. Does ideology plays any role? Not in the sense of like this is what drives people, because even the bureaucracy or even ruling, of course, management, it is based on certain social, ideological, conventional backgrounds. So does it actually play any role in your research, in what you talked about? Otherwise, why we teach our students all these philosophies and ancient?
Very big question about central-local relationship. I think, historically speaking, I think Mao is a little more relaxed, allowing local leaders to have power. Well, in a sense, to balance off the national leaders' power. Because somehow he felt vulnerable in front of Zhou Enlai, Liu Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping, all these people who have actual real power at the center. So on several occasions, he worked with provincial leaders to balance off the national leaders, basically in 1950s, early 1950s and the later 1950s, whatever. During Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao era, that's where there are a lot of local competitions because people want to experiment with different rules, different ways of promoting local economy as a role model for national economy, national development. So I think both Jiang and Hu were, kind of basically local competition is kind of norm instead of exception. However, because of downfall of Bo Xilai, because you remember before the 18th Party Congress, there was a fierce competition between Wang Yang in Guangdong and Bo Xilai in Chongqing. Basically, they were competing for future of China. What would China would be in the future under leadership of these two guys? Because they were aiming for seats on the Politburo Standing Committee. But as a result of arrest of Bo Xilai, and all of a sudden people say, what is going on? How should we, what should we do? So they decided to, because of the change of the political culture or political environment, people decided it was no longer a good idea to show off. So actually all the provincial leaders since 18th Party Congress have maintained a very low key. Nobody dared to stick out. Because there's kind of a, people talk about reverse selection. It's not, probably this is related to kind of promotion, demotion. It's a reverse selection. Basically, I think probably I made a point in the media. Basically, I said if you have A and a B, A is better than B, A should go first. Be demoted or even sent to jail is better. Okay, because this is so because this kind of political norm, this, called a 潜规则. So it's very, so all these politicians are very nervous and they just don't know how to play this game anymore. So sometimes they are learning a wrong lesson by observing the others, and I think, okay, anyway. See, inflation, inflation in terms of the GDP, but real estate, I don't think that's inflation. That's a real thing. Because of the tax reform in 1993, the national government has taken a large chunk of the revenue for the national government, leaving a small chunk to the local government. So what should they do? They say, okay, well, we have nothing else, but we have land. So they decided to sell land. Mm-hmm. And when they sell land, people start to buy, and you just create a bubble. It's a real bubble. And now the bubble is not only at the provincial level, but also at the national level. So they don't want the bubble to be burst all of a sudden, so they want to have a long, slow death, in some way. So they try everything possible to cool down the real estate so that people try to make investment otherwise. But I think, sooner or later, this bubble will be burst. So I think that will be, next year we're talking about 2020. we'll have to see what will happen to Chinese real estate, because I don't think many places these kind of prices are sustainable. So we have a lot of so-called ghost cities in China, because they build these places and people bought them for investment, but nobody came. Nobody else came. You know, they wanted to have somebody else to pass on the higher price to next buyer, but nobody is buying. I think that's the problem. Ideology. So there's no ideology, no ideals, because people are really realists, and they know there are a lot of so-called ideology in terms of the Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory, Jiang Zemin's three represents. You have Hu Jintao's scientific outlook on development, and now you have Xi Jinping thought, and so on and so forth. All these are hallmarks of these leaders, as if they had some kind of ideas about Chinese development, and I don't think people really believe them. And what they do, they pretend to know them, pretend to believe them. They study it every day, painfully study it, because there's now a system. Probably if you're not in China, you don't know this suffering, because party leaders, I think this is the work of Wang Huning. In order to control party leaders, they have an app. They have an app, that is, you have to register on that app. You have to read for certain hours each day. If you don't read it, you'll be monitored. So they have to do it. Sometimes they cannot do it themselves, so they're too busy. They ask their secretary to do it to earn good marks. Because you can, suppose you have 10 people, you are the #1 leader, but you are everybody else is 100%, is on 84. I mean, it doesn't look, are you? So you have to make sure you are always number one, probably 100%. Everybody else has to be 94, 95. So these are very superficial. But underlying is a fear. That is, nobody wants to be, because you have the high tech. It's much easier to control people. You know, even the location of these people. Where you went, whom you met, and so on and so forth. So they are living under fear. So I think that's a problem. Not so much ideology. It's more of survival, political survival.
Sorry, letting people weapons.
Yeah, well, I just wanted, I want to ask about selection, about mobilizing. Who decides? I mean, on national level, on the provincial level, and so on. Is it the local or national organization department of the party and so on? So how this is done? And also, word about the Central Party School. You just mentioned it. Is it important in the chain of advancement?
Yeah, I was actually pointing to a Vital, but
oh yeah, I'm
age
sorry.
before.
So I wanted to ask why you made a point of mentioning that Taiwan is not listed among the 31 provinces. Was that how you assess that situation?
Yeah.
Anywhere in the back also, I haven't. Okay.
All right, good. Selection. Basically, there are two different ideas. One is kind of in terms of procedure. In theory, all these leaders are elected by lower level. If you are take a Chinese provincial government for example. If you are a governor, you have to be elected by the provincial party, Provincial People's Congress, according to Chinese constitution.
How do you become a candidate?
Okay, but in reality, the party decides. How party decide? Organization at the provincial level, all the cadres are managed by the central organization department. So they decide who is the candidate, because otherwise it's very confusing for someone all of a sudden who has nothing to do with this province to be appointed as a governor. Usually they are being transferred from one province to another as a deputy party secretary. because party can transfer one person from one province to another. But once this person is there, he is appointed as a vice governor, as acting governor. Then next time there's opportunity, he will be elected as a governor. But usually the whole process is managed by the Central Organization Department. Central Party School plays a very important role as a training place for all these people, because there's a regulation in these Chinese selecting the political leaders in China. That is, you have to study at least for one month before you are being promoted. So these people, if you are sent to Central Party School for study, that means you have been selected as a candidate for something else. So after this study, you can, you probably get a higher position later on. So people are also taking this opportunity to get connections with their colleagues and friends in Central Party School. But the Central Party School now is managed by Xi Jinping's classmate, Chen Xi. So he's also a director of the Central Organization Department. In terms of Taiwan, Taiwan is not included because Taiwan's leaders are not appointed by Chinese Communist Party. They would like to.
Okay. But yeah, Igal, we haven't played time. Igal and.
So just to zoom out a little bit, we heard so many rich details about the structure of the Chinese political system. If you zoom out for a second and try to compare it to other big countries or other historical empires, what makes the political structure of China today unique?
My question is very simple. You say that there's, everybody is monitored and so on. So what about the people who monitor the leadership? And are they part of the elite? Is there any way to know what their role is or how they became part of the system?
This is a huge. Okay. Another question.
Maybe one more question, please.
It's about the since the system is so internal. So system of rule of promotion and control is so internal, and the object is to follow, to some extent, go overachieve on expectation of the central government and provincial government when you're at lower level. What is the preparedness of party and government official for international relations?
I think we'll stop here. We have 5 more minutes.
Okay. The first topic is very, very big because we're talking about historical comparison as well as cross-sectional comparison with other major countries. Historically speaking, I think Chinese system, Chinese communist system is quite unique in a sense. They had fuller control over people at a lower level, and you probably know in the traditional China, they don't go anything beyond county level. Below county level, you allow local people, local gentries to organize social activities and education, help each other, and so on and so forth. But the Chinese party system, political CCP system, going much, much deeper. They are even. I think today, I think that system is even fuller than before because we have internet. All this kind of high tech. They have for instance, if you if you go on WeChat, if you use any sensitive term, you'll be detected, and your account could be closed, off-sudden. So there are ways to monitor everybody's behavior. So sometimes people talk about 1984. Actually, this is even more than 1984, in some way. But I'm not saying that actually there's no political space for people's discussions. And people are, still have thoughts and still have ideas. They can have some exchange among themselves individually. But I think political space is very, very small, especially on so-called sensitive topics. so I think, but how to say, in terms of the history of China, PRC, in a way, we see the return of the Mao's era in many ways. So this is probably a topic we'll talk this afternoon. How do we know the people who are monitoring others are being monitored or not monitored by somebody else? How do they get into the system? Actually, it's not about hierarchy. It's about duties, about positions. Suppose you are a so-called internet police. You are working in that department. It does not mean you have a higher rank than anybody else. It's your job to monitor, make sure politically sensitive terms are not being used. You can use, no matter who, you can go there and try to close that account. So I think everybody has a position in this kind of system. Therefore, it's your job, it's your livelihood. You have to do it your way. So, but that kind of system somehow creates some kind of uncomfort or fear among others. There's a little joke, in this system actually it did not include this person who is very, very important, called Secretary in Charge of Discipline. And there's a joke circulating in the WeChat saying, at the end of major conference, the person who is in charge of discipline said, at this conference, I'd like to have 2 people stay. 2 people. He did not name who's who. He said 2 people. Then some people get very scared. They start to pee. That doesn't smell good anyway. And then they said actually the 2 people, one person who is serving the tea, one person is monitor this microphone. And he said, I'm just talking about these 2 people. And anybody else whose seat is wet should stay as well. Anyway, okay. The local leaders and the international relations. Actually, it's a complicated question because Chinese system has 2 tracks. One is party, one is government. In the past, especially in the beginning of economic reform, and China was moving toward, under Deng Xiaoping's leadership, China was moving on this kind of a state building. You wanted to emphasize this role of the government, the role of the enterprises, so on and so forth. They want to de-emphasize the role of the party. So, if a party secretary of a university goes out, he went out as a vice president of the university, and the president is a president. So even though in rank he was, higher back home. But now, Chinese Communist Party is sending party delegations around the world, and they say, "Oh, not a problem," because this practice has been very well received by other countries. So they are sending delegations led by Politburo members. And so they are being used as a part of the international relations of China's policy with foreign countries. So, you probably you've seen a lot of delegations like that. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.